Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, so we hear it all the time, right? The economy's up, the economy's down, our country's getting richer, or maybe it's getting poorer. But what does that actually mean? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on national income, see how that big number gets made, and ask if it's really telling us the whole truth. So let's just jump right in with a big question. Is your country getting richer? I mean, we see this question plastered everywhere, in the news, in politics, you name it. But what are we really asking when we say that? And more importantly, how do the experts even come up with an answer? Well, for a long time, the whole conversation has pretty much revolved around this one big headline-grabbing number. It's the go-to metric for figuring out if the economy is healthy, if we're making progress, and how we stack up against other countries. And that number is gross domestic product, or what we all know as GDP. You can basically think of it as the grand total on a country's cash register at the end of the year. It's the economy's official report card, telling us if we're growing or shrinking. But here's the thing. Just like a report card from school, a single grade can be, well, pretty misleading, right? It doesn't really tell you the whole story. So what if this number we all rely on is actually kind of broken? Let's dig into what this big number leaves out. So let's think about this for a second. If prices go up by, say, 10%, but we're producing the exact same amount of stuff, did the country really get any richer? Of course not. And that's the first big problem. Inflation. A rising GDP might just mean rising prices. To fix this, statisticians also calculate GDP at constant prices, which strips out inflation to show us what's really happening.
Okay, next step is the issue of size. Imagine two countries. Both have a GDP of $2 trillion. Sounds pretty equal, right? But wait, one country has a population of just 5 million people, while the other has over 1 billion. Suddenly that $2 trillion looks very different, doesn't it? And that's exactly why we often hear about GDP per capita, which is just GDP divided by the population. It gives us a much better apples-to-apples comparison.
But even GDP per capita, which is supposed to be a better measure, has this massive blind spot. And that's distribution. See, it's just an average. You could have two places with the exact same GDP per person. In one, the wealth is spread out pretty evenly. But in the other, almost all of it, like 98%, is in the hands of the top 2%. The number looks the same on paper, but on the ground, they're two completely different worlds. And believe it or not, the problems with GDP don't even stop there. Think about it. It gives absolutely zero value to all the unpaid work a stay-at-home parent does. It completely ignores the entire hidden economy. You know, all those cash-in-hand jobs. And here's a crazy one. It doesn't care what we're producing. Building a hospital boosts GDP, sure, but so does building a bunch of weapons. The final number just doesn't tell us if people's lives are actually getting any better. Okay, so it's pretty clear that GDP on its own is, let's say, a little shaky. And economists know this. So to get closer to reality, they've come up with a whole alphabet soup of other indicators. Let's dive into that. First up, we've got GNP, or Gross National Product. Now, this is a bit different. While GDP measures everything produced inside a country's borders, GNP tracks the income of a country's citizens, no matter where in the world they earn it. This is a huge deal for a country like Ireland. Why? Because you've got all these giant multinational companies there, and the profits they make don't stay in Ireland, they get sent back home. This can make Ireland's GDP look way bigger than its GNP. And this whole GDP versus GNP thing exploded onto the world stage back in 2015. Get this, Ireland's official GDP figure suddenly jumped by a mind-blowing 26% in a single year. I mean, that's just not possible. It was so absurd that Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman gave it a now famous name, leprechaun economics.
So what on earth happened? Was it some economic miracle? Nope. It was just giant global corporations moving their massive intellectual property assets, think patents and copyrights, onto their Irish books, all for tax reasons. It was basically accounting fiction. To fight back against this crazy distortion, Ireland created its own measurement, Modified Gross National Income, or GNI star. You can think of it as the leprechaun proof number, giving a much more honest look at what's really going on in their domestic economy.
All right, so now that we have these sharper, more honest tools, we can start to see the bigger picture of how economies actually work. And they don't move in a straight line. They have a natural rhythm, a cycle of boom and bust.
Yeah, economies almost never just grow steadily. They move in what's called a trade cycle. It usually starts with a recovery. Jobs are coming back, things are looking up. That can heat up into a boom where employment is high, everyone's spending, but that can also lead to inflation. And what goes up must come down. That boom can cool into a recession, and the technical definition for that is 2 quarters in a row of falling GDP. And if things get really bad, a long, painful downturn is called a depression. These stats are like the vital signs that tell us exactly where we are in that cycle.
So, when an economy hits a rough patch, what can governments do to get things moving again? Well, it's not just about spending money randomly. They rely on this really powerful idea that shows how a little bit of spending can create a huge economic impact. It's called the multiplier effect.
Let's make this super simple. Let's say Mark gets 10 euros. That's a new injection of cash into our little economy. Now, he doesn't just hide it under his bed. He goes out and spends 8 euros on a haircut. Boom! That 8 euros is now income for the hairdresser. What does she do? She takes it and spends 7 euros of it on groceries. Now that 7 euros is income for the local shopkeeper, who then spends 5 euros of it on a taxi home, and you see where this is going.
So let's do the math here. That first 10 euro injection from Mark, well, it led to 8 euros of spending, which led to 7 euros, which led to 5 euros. Already, that single 10 euros has created 30 euros of total national income. That right there is the multiplier effect in action. It's this beautiful ripple effect that shows how one person's spending becomes another person's income over and over again. So we have all these really clever ways to measure money, right? GDP, GNP, GNI star, the multiplier. But this brings us to a really crucial question. What if we're just getting really, really good at counting the wrong thing? Is all this money the only thing that matters? Well, let's look at a totally different way of thinking about this. The United Nations uses something called the Human Development Index, or HDI, and it's fascinating because it doesn't just count the cash. It combines 3 things that really contribute to a good life. How long do people live? How educated is the population? And yes, what's their standard of living? It's a report card for a country's well-being, not just its wallet. And that's where we'll leave it. It really makes you think, doesn't it? When we measure a nation's success, when we hear that big headline number telling us if we're getting richer, what should we really be counting?